Alright, so while I was working on my last video, I got the very original and never done before idea to make my own list of some characters I would like to see in Marvel Rivals since I've been playing it a whole lot recently. Definitely one of my new favorite games for better or worse, mainly for worse, as I really do not have time to play it. But that being said, as a big fan of certain Marvel things as well as the game, I came here to insert my very own valuable and correct opinion into the mix on characters that I think should be in the game. Now, although I like Marvel stuff, I don't claim to be some sort of expert on this sort of thing. I'd say I'm a fairly passive consumer of Marvel media. I've seen some movies, I've seen some of the shows, I've read some of the comics a little, mainly just listen to other YouTubers kind of make videos about them. But to make up for this, I've tried to do a bit of extra research here so I could possibly throw out some ideas for abilities for these characters, but probably just going to be some stuff I get wrong or miss. Now, don't expect any crazy editing with this one either. This is a fairly last-minute video idea that I had, and frankly, I really do not have time to do my usual super extremely highbrow editing and humor that I know most of you come to me for. But you know, I hope you manage. So enjoy. Now this one is kind of a no-brainer for me. Thanos is kind of the Marvel villain at the moment since during the height of the MCU's popularity, he was the main one in the spotlight, and I personally find him to have the potential to be a pretty interesting character in-game. Now, a debate I had with my friends. Do you give Thanos the stones? I say yes, they say no. I feel like it gives him a lot more options and room to fit into certain roles. It seems like without them, he just is kind of a super strong dude who punches stuff, which is fine, but the stones unlock just a shit ton of possibilities for him. Personally, I think it would be kind of cool to have the focus for him be the ability to change between each stone to affect his moveset, providing different buffs to him and his teammates, kind of like a tank version of Storm. And then you'd kind of select the stones maybe through like a sort of pinwheel sort of system, and then you can really do anything with the stones, but you'd probably have him be more of a melee character who has maybe like a changing projectile on his right click, which changes depending on the equipped stone. Now for his ultimate, maybe you could do some sort of like team-wide rewind, similar to like Black Panther, Magic, and Psylocke's team up, because you know he's got like the time stone. I don't know, just throwing the idea out there. Maybe he could just do like a giant thing of damage, like throwing the moon at an area, like he does in the movie. I don't know. You know, personally, I think he'd probably fit best into the tank role. But if you really wanted to make things interesting, I think a strategist could make an interesting option. Maybe using the time stone to undo teammates' damage across a certain amount of time, creating kind of this interesting dynamic of trying to maximize healing by predicting when the most damage would occur to a hero. But maybe that's too complex for this game. And maybe some other ideas for support Thanos is like the ability to use the Reality Stone to disarm enemies, stun enemies with the Mind Stone, maybe give him the bubble from MVC2 because, I don't know, you can. There's a lot of options with this dude. I think either way, though, he's got to be in the game. He's just too big of a character not to be included.
Your weapon is mighty, demon, but now it belongs to Beta Ray Bill.
Alright, so honestly, I did want to just mention this guy really quick. I don't really think he'd be his own character. From what I understand, his abilities are too identical to Thor's. But maybe just make him like a skin for Thor. I think he just needs to be in the game somehow.
Funny. It doesn't feel like a curse. It feels like a promise.
I love Gorr's design. I actually haven't seen Thor Love and Thunder, maybe I need to, but from what I've seen, I just really like what he's got going on. So from my understanding, he's kind of like an alien who obtains the super powerful weapon, the all-black, the Necro Sword, from the symbiote god Null, so probably would have this as like his primary weapon. With the symbiote, he can also create black berserkers to attack enemies, which are kind of like little minions for him, so perhaps maybe like Gorr could have the ability to create these little melee minions that can run after and attack enemies. Probably not like a super likely ability to be put in the game, because I feel like that might be, you know, technologically complex, but like, we got Doctor Strange Portal, I think we can just have little dudes running at people. He's also a pretty big torture guy, I guess, so, you know, having the ability to root enemies using the Living Abyss from the Necro Sword as a torture method could be a possibility for an ability in his kit. And for his ult, definitely got to go with the classic God Bomb, which is used to kill gods. Very unique name. Overall, I see Gorr probably being a duelist more than anything. Not sure he'd really fit into another role super well, but this game can be kind of surprising with how it tries to categorize characters. So who knows? Maybe Gorr is a strategist.
He has spirit. I'll crush it out of him.
For Enchantress, I definitely see her being probably a strategist that's maybe a bit of a vanguard as well, you know, having the ability to heal allies, but also heavily relying on simply preventing damage from occurring. This could mainly be done by bubbling allies, you know, kind of fairly similar to Magneto's already existing ability, as well as maybe using like a mixture of charms and disarms against enemies, all while using her basic ability to heal allies and damage enemies. Now, I know this is a pretty basic concept for the character, but Enchantress does have the option to access a stupidly large variety of powers, such as, you know, illusions, teleportation, levitation, telekinesis, flight, physical transformation, and just a lot. So there's a bunch of options for her kit, to be honest. And although I think she'd make a good strategist with her abilities, I think she could pretty easily fit into almost any role for the game.
Kill you, motherfucker, I'll kill you. I'll just enjoy it better.
Alright, so this feels kind of pointless to speculate about Blade's abilities since he's definitely coming to the game probably sometime soon, but we'll go over a few things anyways. One thing we gotta get out of the way is that this dude definitely has to be a duelist, no doubt. I think it'd be interesting to see how they try to spin him into another role, but I'm very doubtful that this sort of thing happens. Now, looking at the vampire side of things, we could either go with some sort of close-range vampire bite that could maybe serve as an execute below a certain amount of health for enemies, or you could maybe lean into the sort of life-draining aspect of it as a self-heal for himself. Now, for like the main kit rotation, like what you mainly do while you're in combat, at first, you know, the theme of Blade kind of made me think maybe of like Bloodborne, and then that clicked with me, like, maybe you play like you're using the Shikage in Bloodborne. Maybe you have it where you can go into a powered up mode that increases the damage that you deal, but also constantly drains your life, so you're kind of incentivized to get in and out of combat, or heal yourself while you're in combat. Add some little short dashes into his kit too for some mobility, and it's pretty much like you're playing Bloodborne Remastered. You know, it's like we don't even need it anymore, right? Right? Now, some other abilities for his kit could include his newer shapeshifting abilities, which unlock after drinking Dracula's blood. And I mean, we already got Dracula shown off recently, so I mean, that's not too far-fetched. Leaning into his other weapons, maybe he could use throwing knives or guns, or maybe some sort of projectile that could serve as a blink as a mobility tool for him. Or for mobility, if you wanted to go into the transformation stuff, maybe you could use his mist form as a form of invulnerability and mobility. For his ultimate, you could do a giant life drain ability that kind of drains the blood of enemies around him, healing him while he's in a fight, so kind of getting a lot of sustain as well as doing maybe like a small amount of DPS. Or on the other side of that, although this isn't usually how it's depicted in the comics from what I've seen, maybe his ult could be like a wolf form for him, where he kind of pulls like a Father Gascoigne and turns into a a giant, muscly, seductive, furry beast.
I'm Bob.
Now, as cool as Sentry is, at least in my opinion, I'm not really certain how this character would work in universe. He seems way too powerful to fit into the game, but we've got an eclectic mix of power among the cast. Because he can kind of do almost anything, his kit doesn't have too many limitations on what he could be for a role. Now, initially for his ultimate, I was thinking that he transforms into the Void to blind all the enemies around him, changing his primary to a different ability that does more damage maybe. But then this got me thinking, like, what if instead of that, the more damage you did, he would transform between the two forms? Kind of like Gnar from League, where he starts off as the Sentry, but as he does more damage, he transforms into the Void, which is a much squishier but higher damaging form of him. And this is sort of like the main concept that I have for him, but I think he'd work kind of as a Vanguard in his base form best, functioning more like a dive tank like Captain America, but instead of the ability to just run at your enemies, have the ability to fly instead. I don't know, I really like the concept of the character though, and if I knew maybe a bit more about him, I'd probably be more comfortable recommending what else to do with him, but I think the concept here of having this sort of transformation gauge could be at least somewhat interesting to implement and iterate upon.
You make deals with the devil, sometimes.
Now, there's a lot of options with Ghost Rider. It seems like this dude can do like a whole lot of random shit, but to focus on his abilities, I definitely think his kit would more than likely revolve around the ability of using his chains as a primary form of attack, with the ability to maybe heat them up to do some sort of % health damage over time fire ability, or maybe you could just use fire directly against your opponents. With his chains, I think having the ability to pull enemies close to him would make a whole lot of sense, or maybe you could have the ability where his chains functions more as a tether to a specific area if you're trying to do something maybe a bit more unique. And for his pull, I think it kind of would be cool maybe to have it function like a sort of lasso effect, where the longer you charge it up, the more damage it does, and once it hits like the peak of the ability, it would then function as a pull. So it could be a mix of a damaging ability or a pull depending on how long you held the ability. Now, for his ultimate, I think you could go with his Penance Stare, maybe having it function similar to McCree's ult from Overwatch, where the longer you stare at an enemy, the more damage it does. But you could also have something for his kit that incorporates his motorcycle. Could be the ult for that ability, or maybe it could be some sort of passive that gives him, sort of movement speed buff out of combat. Definitely some options there. A very stinky character. I think Hazmat's pretty cool though. Now for her actual abilities, I don't think there's that much to say here because I'm just gonna rip her stuff from another game. I'd say or just have her function as Viper from Valorant. Big damage over time character with toxic smoke grenades that could be used to block line of sights and objectives. For her abilities, you could do pretty much any variation of the forms of the smoke grenade, maybe like a one that's like a very long strip, one that's kind of a circle area, and then maybe for her ult, you could just kind of do a giant circle like Viper's ult from Valorant. Honestly, yeah, just just pull Viper's kit and you're probably pretty good to go. But if they wanted to, they could maybe lean into the radiation aspect of her more for her abilities. Maybe having her primary be this kind of like radioactive laser, or maybe like her ult be like a giant wave of radiation that's used against enemies, kind of nuking the area with damage, while also leaving behind maybe a bit of fallout in the form of some sort of damage over time in the area. Personally, I'd probably lean more into the poisonous stuff for her abilities, but I think you could do a pretty decent mix of both.
Ah, music to my ears.
Now, I'm a sucker for characters that have this sort of like magic voice or whatever, and Songbird definitely fits that criteria, as she has like supersonic powers, allowing her to kind of mess with people's eardrums in a variety of different ways with her voice alone. And although I haven't done as much research into him, I think some of the abilities here could also apply to Black Bolt as well if you wanted to go with him instead of Songbird. But for her, I think she'd probably fit best into the Vanguard role, as she seemingly is pretty well known for making vocal force fields which could be used to protect her team. For a primary ability, I think it would be probably easily incorporated as a sort of like large blast of wind that could be used against enemies, maybe a blinding or dizzying effect on some of her abilities to mess with enemies or keep them off of her backline. She's also pretty often depicted with like wings and stuff, so you could slap some sort of glide ability onto her, or maybe you could just allow her to fly in general if you really wanted to. I don't know.
Earth's mightiest heroes, huh? How limited.
So this concept, I guess, could probably apply to
Captain Marvel
as well. I just kind of prefer Nova, so I decided to choose him here. For this guy, I feel like on paper, he'd probably play like an alternative version of Iron Man with maybe a bit more close range or melee focus. Maybe you could center a lot of his abilities around being charged up, kind of like he's channeling the Nova Force, meaning that they'd be hard-hitting but also fairly telegraphed and improperly done, with the catch being that he could still move while they're charging. Having some sort of long-range poke opportunities with his primary, maybe some sort of charged Kamehameha for long distance, and then for his other abilities, maybe like a charged ability that could do massive damage in melee or close proximity to him, utilizing his flying to rush in or pop from behind cover to pull these off. On the other hand, although from what I understand Nova's healing factor is limited to himself, I feel like he could make a great healer, to be honest, serving as a healer that could kind of overlook the battlefield, doing burst amounts of AoE healing with his charged abilities. For his ultimate, I'm a bit unsure of what he'd do. Maybe you could have like an ultimate where he crashes down onto an area doing like a large amount of either damage, or maybe providing an area of invulnerability for his allies if you were to go with the support route. And although I've kind of talked about this character enough, another option you could go with if you really wanted to have a third one is maybe make him like a flying pure melee duelist, kind of like Iron Fist. But I'm not going to dive into that one too much. I'm not a game designer, and I think I've talked about this guy enough.
Funny, a lot of people react that way to lawyers.
So, very weird character to try and implement. Realistically, could not make the character actually play as if you were blind. I'm not really sure what you would do with Daredevil personally to make him stand out, but he'd definitely be probably like a melee-focused duelist if I were to guess. Since he doesn't need to see people to sense them, having wall hacks could be kind of interesting, maybe having his ultimate being like a giant enemy reveal for his abilities. And if you didn't want to go to the full like wall hacks route for him, you could do like a Punisher sort of thing, where if you see them for a bit and they go behind a wall, you can still see them, or maybe have a function similar to Spider-Man's Spidey sense. He's a pretty beloved character, so I feel like having him in here is a no-brainer. I'm a bit uncertain of how you would really make him work and stand out as a unique duelist, but
oh, hello. I know, right? Whose balls did I have to fondle to get...
So because of his regeneration factor, I feel like Deadpool could either be a Vanguard or a duelist, or maybe like a mix of both, like his beloved movie co-star Wolverine. I was thinking from a role point of view, he'd probably serve a similar purpose to Venom, used as a dive character that instead of producing a giant shield, have regenerative abilities. And since he's known as a fourth wall breaking character, there's almost an impossible amount of options for the character when it comes to his actual abilities. I think one thing that he could have that would kind of fit into this would be some sort of teleport that would kind of break the game in some sense, or kind of defy the logic, just rushing through reality. Now, in the same vein of game-breaking things, I was thinking his ultimate could maybe be some sort of like hugely disruptive things for players from like a control perspective. Maybe kind of have him do some sort of AoE stun where he pops up some notification about your controller or a keyboard being unplugged, some Psycho Mantis from Metal Gear type shit. Now, if you really wanted to be annoying, you could have his ultimate instead invert your controls or maybe mix up the input of your character's abilities. And although this does sound kind of funny, I think if this was ever actually implemented, I would fucking hate this character. Deadpool would quickly become known as one of the most annoying heroes in the game, just like his fans. Hey, it's just jokes, folks, just jokes. Now, when it comes to his basic stuff, I'd say it'd probably make a lot of sense for his other abilities to use his guns or katana, more than likely both, maybe utilizing one more than the other for the primary attack. But back to the weird stuff, and this is kind of a dumb idea, but I think it'd be interesting to give him the ability to maybe steal the primary attack of another character he's killed, similar to essentially stealing their weapons or looting their bodies for a short period of time. I don't know, It's probably stupid. I'm just kind of throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks with this guy. He's a very popular character, though, so I think he definitely should be in the game. Now, Hitmonkey is supposedly one of the leaked characters for the game that I'm hearing through the grapevine, and personally, I'm all for it. Now, what desire outside of him just being a monkey do I have for him being in the game? Well, that's about it. I really do like the fact that he's a monkey. Honestly, that sales pitch is really all it took. Okay, but what about his powers and abilities? Well, he's a monkey. There's also a hitman, a hit monkey, if you will. And I mean, there's a lot of things you could do with him since he's kind of open-ended. I'd say him being hypermobile just kind of makes sense, give him the standard, wall climb passive, maybe some sort of grapple ability. And for one of his abilities, I think I might be stealing this one from Smite, but I kind of just want to be able to jump at a target and wail on the target for a short period of time, doing damage and rooting them in place. Honestly, I feel like he'd probably play kind of similar to Deadpool since they're both fans of guns and katanas. For his gimmick, I think it would be kind of cool if he could use abilities at the same time, since he does have feet that can use weapons as well as his prehensile tail. There's not too many superpowers with this guy, so it is a bit limiting on how you would flesh out his kit other than just having him use certain weapons for certain moves or introducing martial arts into his kit, which could do a variety of things. He's a very open-ended character with a lot of room to kind of mix and match different melee ability synergies to be a pretty interesting duelist.
Oh, I love you, you big dumb lizard!
Now, this character is kind of a new one, so I'll be honest, I really didn't know that much about her. I just kind of fucked with her design and had to research what she did after. And honestly, I think she'd make for a really cool strategist. Moon Girl is apparently one of the smartest people in the world, if not the smartest, and because of her insane intellect, she's known to be a very competent inventor. One of her main weapons seems to be a bubble gun, which I think, honestly, you could just steal Jeff's bubbles for this if you really wanted to, as a form of healing for her, with this maybe serving as a sort of alternate ability, or maybe a primary attack for her. On the theme of stealing from other strategists, she's pretty well known for wearing rollerblades, so I'm gonna ask that you just yoink Luna's skating ability for her as well. And since she is an inventor, although I don't think it's depicted explicitly in the comics, I think it could be cool to have her have an ability where she uses a jump pad ability that she can throw down for everyone to use. Could definitely make team fights a bit more interesting. I'd say my main hiccup with her kit would probably be the incorporation of Devil Dinosaur, which is apparently it's a dinosaur that she can switch consciousness with and is a fairly integral part to her character. So I really didn't know what to do. I was thinking maybe for her ult she could transform into this character, or maybe have a sort of a Junkrat ult effect where she is left behind while you take control of Devil Dinosaur. The only problem I'd see with this is that for supportive ults, at least currently, you really do want something that helps your team out, and this would just be likely a lot of damage. But honestly, who cares about the meta? Maybe she wouldn't get picked a lot for that reason, but I think the fun factor is probably more important here.
Better to perish for what I believe in than endure forever as a traitor to life.
Ideally, I think Surfer would probably fit best as a strategist. Now, I'm going to get my dumbest idea out of the way first, and I think that as well as some sort of flying or gliding ability, Surfer needs to have some sort of momentum-based movement. I want this dude to, essentially be able to skateboard on stuff, or maybe in a toned-down version, like a wall ride like Lucio, to gain some sort of forward momentum. I want to be playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater here. The devs are talented. I think they could make it happen, but in reality, this is probably too stupid to waste time on. Now, beyond dumb movement shit, I was thinking he could essentially heal or deal damage with his primary, since he's pretty easily able to manipulate matter. Outside of other strategists, I think Surfer could definitely afford to be a bit tankier, serving as a more vanguard and strategist mix, which could be used to counter dive comps with, faster ability afforded to him, as well as some tanky abilities. And because of his absorption powers, I was thinking he could also have an ability which allows him to become maybe invulnerable and absorb damage done to him for a short time, releasing it as an AoE heal to his allies around him, or maybe as a damage AoE attack if you wanted to have him be a duelist. For his ultimate, to steal from Lucio again, I was thinking maybe you could just give him a giant shield to all of his allies for a short amount of time in the area, pretty similar to Lucio's. So maybe this guy would just be a lot like Lucio, just without the AoE heal or speed buff.
Your attempts at humor bore me.
I mean, Doom's already pretty much in the game, so he's got to be coming at some point, right? I hope? Either way, I'll keep this kind of brief because he is confirmed for the game, it seems like, but he's one of those characters that could fit into really almost any role. You could have him be sort of minion or clone style character that mainly uses his Doom bots to perform a variety of functions. Could use the Doom bots to cast force fields for a tank role, essentially kind of like Loki's healing circles but shields, or maybe use them as damaging minions that attack enemies for a more duelist-centered role. I would say you could also just use them for healing, but we've already got Loki and then Ultron, which apparently will kind of maybe use the same idea, so not really sure if we need another character that does that. That being said, you could definitely lean into the support role for Doom, though. He's a pretty smart guy and is pretty well known for just whipping up stuff in his lab to heal people. I think his electric or sorcery powers could definitely be present in his kit in some capacity. They could be used to maybe stun enemies, make force fields, or have some sort of chain attack like Moon Knight. Probably gotta fly too. I think definitely definitely got to have flying. I said I was going to keep this brief. I'm going to stop myself here. Probably would fit best with a tank role in my opinion, but you have a lot of options here. I'm very excited to have him in the game.
It's a lead-line sell for you, Sandman. Fools, observe.
Sandman is super straightforward. Not going to spend too much time with him. Very obviously, I think he'd probably be some sort of vanguard. Kind of like Groot, this guy seems to be primed to be like a sort of wall character. But maybe to distinguish his walls, you could have them be breakable in certain parts, like kind of like the destructible terrain in the maps. For another one of his abilities, for an escape or an engagement tool, I was thinking he could have like a sort of Jeff-style dive where he goes into a pool of sand. I feel like maybe having a blind would fit him really well too. I mean, you already got like the sand attack in Pokemon, so just throwing sand at people, that's kind of what it does. I don't know, you have a lot of options with this dude because, you know, he has the ability to control sand, which can be used to make a variety of things. So, sky's the limits with this guy.
I am Dr. Octopus.
Alright, so we got the fan favorite Spider-Man villain here, Doc Ock. And for this one, I'd say pretty straightforward design philosophy, just kind of make him like a mobile Roadhog. That means, you know, it's the sort of standard mobility options. A wall climb, some sort of leap, grappling, a lot of options here. But he's definitely got to have something that keeps him moving around. Alongside this, there's the kind of the other obvious abilities, and that's sort of maybe a long-range pull. And from here, I think is where it gets maybe a bit trickier as we start to try to define what his role on a team would be. I think being a tank would make a lot of sense for him, but you could go with a more DPS-centered role too if you wanted to. For the tank role, you could definitely do some sort of deflect or shield ability where his tentacles just like spin really fast in front of him with his primary attack, probably looking something pretty similar to Venom, Groot, or I guess now Mr. Fantastic's animations. And if you were to be a DPS, I feel like it'd probably be kind of like Bucky, a mid-range character that now with actual good mobility as opposed to the walking soldier, could specialize on sneaking around and picking off squishier targets from the enemy team before hopping back out.
Martin Lee is no more, Hammerhead.
I'm a big fan of Mr. Negative visually, but I didn't really know all that much about the guy if I'm being honest. And on paper, I was like, wow, this guy sounds really cool. Like, he could be like a Cloak and Dagger. Their abilities are super similar. And then I realized that, like, he pretty much has the same abilities. It's just kind of Mr. Negative is the singular guy instead of being split across two people. For his game identity though, although he does kind of like split into the Cloak and Dagger sort of archetype, I think Mr. Negative definitely needs to be tied more to the negative side of things as opposed to his philanthropic healing side. So for this reason, I think he would fall probably into the duelist role. One thing he's pretty well known for is his Corrupting Touch, which is like a mind control ability. So I think, you know, and maybe this is a bit weird, but for his ult, you could have like enemies attack each other and an AoE around him. It's an ability I've seen done in other games, and maybe they wouldn't want to do that here, but I think it could be kind of interesting. He's pretty well known for using a katana, which I think could be used to cut bullets. It's been done in like the battle versus Hood, so possibly serving as a deflect ability. There's a few different options that you have with him, but I feel like leaning into his sword fighting and mind control aspect of his personality would probably suit the game the best, probably functioning kind of like Genji, but with more melee focus. He's known to be pretty strong and fast, so you could really just throw some ability tools on him as well. And if you wanted to, you could implement some sort of healing factor so he wouldn't die at the front lines. It could be maybe like a good chance to utilize the Martin Lee aspect of him if you really wanted to. That's kind of my overall concept with the character. There's some different options you could have with him, and I'm not super familiar with the character, so maybe there's some like really cool and weird stuff he could do that I'm not aware of. But yeah, I think he'd probably be more of a melee duelist sort of role.
I'm the Green Goblin, not that you live long enough for it to matter.
I mean, come on, man. You gotta have the Green Goblin. Now, on paper, he seems like a pretty straightforward port of just flying Junkrat, because he does love himself some bombs. And although I think this would work for his primary ability to just kind of have the bouncing explosives, kind of like Squirrel Girl, for his other items, I feel like you could use maybe different bombs to have some sort of different AoE effects. For example, his pumpkin bombs are pretty well known to be able to melt through stuff, so he could have like a damage over time puddle that he throws down, or you know, maybe smoke bombs or toxic bombs that he throws down, similar to my concept of Hazmat. He's also a pretty big fan of a scary gas, so for his ultimate, I think a large AoE projectile that fears opponents could work pretty well. And as for his role, I think he's got to be a duelist for sure.
To me, my X-Men.
Cyclops is probably my favorite X-Men, so I don't know, I felt I had to include him in here somewhere. Now, I honestly wasn't sure what he'd do, since he's really only known for like the laser eye stuff, but there's a lot of options with what you could do, even if this seems limiting. You know, at first I was stumped for a bit on how he'd function. I was thinking maybe he'd have like an AoE team buff for some sort of inspiration mechanic, you know, throw in a giant optic blast from MVC2. Primary attack could just be like a piercing laser that you could hold down, kind of like Scarlet Witch, but instead of auto aim, it would just be like a straight line. Nothing too crazy, but then I was thinking of how could he fight? And then I thought of the opening fight scene from X-Men 97 and it clicked. Make this dude a fucking movement demon. I'm talking some sort of propulsion laser that shoves him in the opposite direction from where he's looking. So he's kind of just like flying around in the middle of battle like in that scene, being able to, shoot in the opposite direction to dodge the other way. I think having this sort of tech in his kit could make him stand out from other ranged DPSs in the game, outside of just changing his primary attack, and could make his skill ceiling pretty high. No matter what though, I just need him in here in some capacity. Please, Netties, put Cyclops in the game.
1 mutant or 100, they shall all bow before the great Soviet Empire.
Now, Omega Red is not super well known, I feel like, but he's personally one of my favorites. Now, his whole thing is having tentacles, but like, if I want Doc Ock in this game, I can't have 2 tentacle guys. Like, 3 if we count Namor and whatever freaky stuff he's up to over there. But Omega Red differs with his tentacles as he's essentially able to drain the life force of his enemies through them, and because he's super durable already, being a counter to Wolverine, I think his role as a drain-style tank would suit him best, allowing him to essentially heal from the damage he does. Also, as I was kind of doing more research into the character, he does have the ability to use deadly spores, which I guess could also be thrown into his kit to debuff enemies from range. For his ult, I was thinking he could have a giant AoE root for enemies in the area, causing them to take damage over time, which heals Omega Red during its duration. I think that would make a lot of sense for him mechanically. And because he is kind of like tentacle character, maybe throw in like a grapple too, just for some like fun mobility options. I don't know.
You know how long I've been waiting for this? Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself here.
Gambit, definitely a pretty beloved X-Men character, and I'd be super surprised if he didn't eventually get into Rivals. Now, there's a lot of options with Gambit since his powers allow him to essentially charge up any object and turn it into a deadly projectile, but to keep things simple, I'd say it's definitely a good idea to have his playing cards play a key role in his abilities, serving as a primary, while maybe having the ability to charge up his shots to do additional damage. He could also use his staff for a lot of certain abilities, maybe a sort of a ground slam attack by charging it, or use it as a mobility tool more than anything. Personally, I'd be perfectly fine with him just stealing Twisted Fate's kind of a deck shuffle ability, where it's kind of like a rotation of changing card abilities, and when you reactivate it, it selects that card in its unique effect. He does also know martial arts, and if we were to view him in his full strength state as New Sun, he does have the potential to manipulate molecules, allowing him to heal wounds and maybe turning him into a strategist. But yeah, he definitely needs some sort of presence in the game, but I'm kind of unsure on the best way to implement him, if I'm being honest. But it's not like I wasn't going to talk about him. Like, it's fucking Gambit.
I know I look strange, but there are some fringe benefits.
Another very easy choice for an X-Men, Nightcrawler is such a beloved character. For his playstyle, I feel like he'd be like kind of a faster version of Magic, because he has his little swords as compared to the, giant great sword. For his ult, maybe you could do a more supportive ability with him, doing kind of like an invisible invulnerability version of Jeff's ult, but only for allies. Kind of like he's safely teleporting them in or out of a fight. Will probably suck at low elos, but could allow for some cool synergies in game. If you wanted to go for something a bit more normal for the ult, you could probably essentially just steal Psylocke's ult. That is an option, but I'd prefer to go with something maybe a bit more unique. In the same vein of like grabbing someone and teleporting them, he could use this as sort of a grappling technique against enemies, allowing the ability to reposition an enemy with him over a short distance. Also, probably not super interesting, but he can climb walls, so, give him the Spidey treatment as a passive. I don't know. Very excited to see him in-game in some capacity. I feel like they have to include him. So I had to include him in this list somehow. I don't think that my kit here is anything super crazy or interesting, so feel free to leave your own suggestions.
Some sort of solar energy. Still figuring it out. Makes me strong, though. Really strong.
Alright, so I really do enjoy Sunspot's design as a character. It kind of scratches the same itch that Mr. Negative does for me, but I'll be honest, I was kind of a bit unsure of how to handle him. With Johnny Storm coming in the near future, I feel like a lot of his abilities, like the fire-based damage over time stuff that could have applied to Sunspot, might instead land on Human Torch instead. So I mean, we still could do that for Sunspot, I guess, or maybe we could try to lean on the energy absorption aspect of his playstyle. On paper, I feel like Sunspot would be a very obvious DPS, maybe using damage over time abilities to light enemies on fire that kind of drains their energy so that he can use a large burst attack instead. But I thought that maybe he could also do this from a supportive role as well. Have him flying around, throwing some sort of shield on himself or his allies that causes an explosive burst of fire damage around them when broken. Or maybe depending on the damage done to his shields on either him or his allies, it allows him to do a burst of healing or unlocks a damaging ability for him. You could also play around with him having to power up to unlock his Sunspot form, but I feel like just walking around as Roberto would be the equivalent of being forced to get ult as Bruce Banner before you're allowed to play Hulk. Would just be very boring in my opinion, but it is an option, I guess.
I who am eternal can never be defeated.
Alright, so Apocalypse I think is a pretty well-known and well-liked X-Men villain, and although I think it'd be cool to see him in-game, he's another one of those characters that can seemingly do anything, which makes it kind of difficult to speculate on his abilities. Based on how huge he is, I think he'd probably fit pretty well, at least physically, into the Vanguard role. From what I understand, he's got some insane regeneration and healing abilities, so I feel like maybe giving him a passive in which he heals outside of combat could fit pretty well. He's also able to increase the power of other mutants, so in-game, I feel like this could be some sort of AoE damage buff for his allies he could use every now and then, sort of serving as a kind of guard and anchor unit for the team. Other than this, he has a lot of other options, like he can teleport, so maybe that's an ability option. He has the ability to generate a force field around himself, so that's an option too, I guess. Essentially, I feel like his extra abilities could just help him in making himself tankier or provide him some sort of additional movability. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things you can do with Apocalypse. He could fit into a lot of different roles, but I think he would suit the game pretty well.
I don't mind being wrong, as long as I can correct my mistakes.
Cable is a really beloved character, and although I did kind of struggle with how you would make him for a bit, having him function as something more than just like a Call of Duty kind of character, I honestly think you could probably just make him Baptiste from Overwatch with a few changes. I feel like the gun can stay pretty much the exact same, kind of like Rocket's, where bullets are on the left click while there's a healing splash effect on the right click. Like Baptiste, I think you could also just have the AoE healing item that he places down, maybe the same holographic wall that increases damage when shot through. That definitely seems like the type of futuristic bullshit that Cable would just have laying around. If you wanted to, you could also probably incorporate some sort of, time traveling mechanics similar to the Rewind team up that we have already in game. Not sure how it would really synergize with the supportive kit, but it's an option. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to spend too much time with him. Maybe everyone won't like the fact that he's a support, but I think the role would suit him pretty well.
Hank McCoy here. Or if you prefer my friendly nom de guerre, Beast.
Just make Beast Winston, man. It's kind of the same character, it's a smart gorilla man. Realistically though, I think he'd probably be more of a mobile dive tank serving kind of the same role. Gotta give him that Winston leap for sure. I think that would fit him well. I've heard people say that they want him as a strategist, which I could definitely see as a role for him as well. I mean, for the super smart characters, they can essentially fit into almost any role because they can just be said to have invented something that their role can do. Like, Hank McCoy built a giant bubble shield and a Tesla gun. Yep, sure, why not? Oh, he whipped up some sort of regenerative potion that he can throw at allies now to function as a support. So yeah, I guess that works. I don't think Duelist would particularly suit him well out of all the roles, and realistically, I think he would probably fall into more of the Vanguard role, but again, there's a lot of room for experimentation with this guy.
I could just phase through the gizmo and quietly short it out.
Kitty Pryde is a pretty sick character, fairly beloved by a lot of people, so definitely feel like we have to put her in game. Now, to get the obvious part out of the way, you've got to give her some sort of invulnerable state that allows her to walk through walls. A pretty easy part of her kit. From here, though, definitely gets a bit tricky, because I mean, she could root people by sticking them into objects, but how exactly would you do that in game? Maybe it would just be some sort of animation where she briefly pushes them or grabs them and pulls them into the terrain feature to root them, kind of like a charged Doomfist punch. I do think she could kind of be some sort of grapple character where she sticks her hand through opponents to throw them around a bit, which she seems to have done in the comics a lot before. The way she fights, though, is very unique, almost too unique. Maybe I'm just dumb, but I'm a bit unsure of how to make her anything other than a melee DPS that can become invulnerable. I don't know, I have a few ideas of how she could work, but I'm probably just going to bow out on this one. If anyone has any interesting ideas for Kitty Pryde, leave them below. She's a character I'd really like to have in game, but she's such a fucking weirdo. Although I really don't have a huge connection to this character, I feel like including armor is just such an easy include for the game. Pretty straightforward stuff here. I mean, she essentially is just a giant walking shield, so she could just really be the embodiment of a giant meat shield for her team. You could toy around with her being able to be broken out of her shield if stunned, or maybe if too much damage is done to her, kind of like the Hulk or Diva sort of mechanic. And then for her ultimate, maybe she would just create a giant shield of invulnerability for her allies. I don't know, overall she's a pretty protective asset for her team, fairly basic stuff, so I'm not going to speculate too much here, but I think that she's, again, an easy include for the game. Alright, I think we're done. Probably a bit longer than I was expecting it to be, and I hope I can edit this as fast as I originally wanted to. Probably not. Either way, I thank you all for watching. My upload schedule for my next video might be pushed back a bit because of this, so just heads up on that. A lot of X-Men in this video. I really like them a lot, so sorry about that, but I hope you like some of the concepts here, even if a majority of them are dog shit that would not only be unhealthy for the game, but unfun to play against. And this is completely ignoring the facts about characters that I probably messed up, but oh well. Please comment below and let me know your own thoughts of characters and concepts you'd like to see. And of course, feel free to let me know. I don't think I have to tell you, but things that I messed up in this video, I'm sure there are a lot. Special thanks, of course, to this month's patrons. Mads, Dave the Unknown, Griff, Einhar Anderson, Turmeric, Maddie Grady, Zaro Dunking, Kenny, Daddy Yam, Bup1, and Oliver. Thank you all so much for watching and supporting the content. Really does mean a lot. Gonna start working on cranking out that next video, whatever the hell that ends up being. But, enough yapping for me today. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.